right, well, welcome and thank you for joining us today for the ASNA Edge January marketing meeting. We have with us, I'm going to have you guys wave, Mike Toohill. He's our technical agronomist. We have Sterling Smith, Director of Ag Research, and Brooks York, our Director of Producer Services. Now, guys, we just came off a big report last week. So Brooks, Sterling, have we seen any movement from that in the markets as a result of this? So without any further talking from me, why don't you guys kick us off?
Well, actually, Chris, go ahead, Brooks.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to kind of follow up on what Christy said there, Sterling, is if you tuned in for that WASDE report, we really kind of tried to get as many people involved in that WASDE report as we could. So if you tuned in, we thank you for that. And it didn't disappoint. And I think it'd probably be good, Sterling, I'll buy you some time here to go through those balance sheets. Sterling has done a great job of sharing the results of the WASDE in the daily market email. So if you're not getting those, make sure that you do. But in fact, we did see some changes. It probably, as any report, it was never what we anticipated. There really wasn't a huge change, but we had some changes to stocks. We had some changes to yield, both increase and decrease. Consistent changes were in exports, and I'm not going to steal Sterling's thunder as we go through that, but it was kind of this combination of bullish and bearish, and maybe the bulls won in this one in the short term, but it certainly looks like one of the things that was noticeable is exports on both corn and beans dropped below the 2 billion bushel mark. And that of anything, of any of the increases, even the decrease in stock, that's probably what's got my attention long term. But to break them down, Sterling, do you have your tables available to show on each commodity?
Actually, I don't have them right in front of me right at the moment.
Well,
because I've actually moved beyond those for the stuff that I'm going to talk about.
Well, I'll turn it over to you, and you can kind of hit the highlights unless we want to go through those. And if we do, I'll tell you what, since I mentioned them, let's go ahead and take a sneak peek. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Sterling, you can walk us through them if you would like, and let me share my screen, and we'll look at them. So again, this is the January WASDE, and we've been through them once, but not in a marketing meeting, setting. So let's share this, and we'll look at these results together. The first one that I'm going to pull up is corn, and Sterling, I will let you narrate what happened on the corn report.
Well, with the corn report,
let me make sure that I have got the right template up here, because I fear that I've got the template going in. No, we've got it here. Here we go.
That's the December balance sheet. We need the January balance sheet.
Let's go look at the January. Let's do that. Let me switch over and get that. And let's see. Let me stop sharing for a second, and we'll switch over. Sorry about that. I don't know why that didn't update. We'll stop sharing, and let me snag that for you. This actually came, I'm going to pull up the and 3, 2, 1. There's a cotton number, but let's go past cotton. Let's go back up here and sneak back to corn, and we can walk down through them. Wheat, we got key points. You see all kinds of good stuff Sterling puts out here. You got to get a sneak peek if you did not look at this yesterday. All good stuff that comes out, and voila, that looks better, doesn't it, Sterling?
Yes, it does. So what we had happen here is they actually cut ending stocks by 15 million bushels. The market was looking for ending stocks to actually be higher by 75, 80 million bushels. So we caught the market a little bit off guard. And what drove this was actually a bit of a surprise. This area harvested number. Notice how much that came down. We lost 1.6 up a little bit. That cut into our production noticeably. And then down here at the exports, we took away 150 million bushels, but net, we actually ended up with the smaller corn carryout. So this means our leftovers going into what the next really big report will be, the May report, where we'll start to get our first look at next year. So we're going to be starting out with right now about 1.1 billion, which is a pretty tight corn supply. Now, moving on to soybeans, the market wasn't looking for any big shocks here. We were looking for anywhere from -10 to unchanged to maybe +5. And what we did here, notice we cut yields noticeably, 0.7 of a bushel an acre, which for soybeans is a big deal. We also shaved, 300,000 acres. So that took our total production number down. But what offset this and what kept the bulls under control, we took about 55 million off of the export number. So what we're exporting actually went down, and that again gave us a little bit of a bullish setup for the soybeans, meaning we have a smaller supply, and we're coming in with one. It's not the smallest number ever, but it's certainly not a big and bearish number. And looking at wheat, we weren't looking for a lot of changes, and we were not disappointed. They took about 4 off the balance sheet for wheat. But again, when we go down here to the exports number, let's see, domestic use, planted, harvested, total use. Why in my export numbers aren't exports right here? They left that number unchanged. Now going forward on wheat, if you look, export sales, by the way, will not be out today. They will be out tomorrow because of the holiday. If you look at the export numbers, we are running behind. Export inspections did pick up after being just awful the last 4 weeks. But if we start to see that number come down, that could add into the wheat situation. And cotton was a little bit of a surprise. The street was looking for no changes on cotton at all. And we actually added 700,000 bales here. And again, the export number kind of came down. Now, we'll see about the export number. We've been running behind, but that can change if we see things change in China. So,
Sterling, if you were to recap all of this, I mean, it looks like to me from price movement, it looked like corn seemed to be the benefactor of any of the commodities coming out of the report. I know we had big days on soybeans the day of the report, but corn was able to follow up with some pretty impressive days. And on a chart, out the gate.
Corn was the winner off of the report. And then we need to talk about yesterday. So if Christy will throw me the ball, we're going to talk about what happened yesterday. Yesterday didn't grab any headlines because days like yesterday never do. But what happened, Christy, can you throw me the ball? There we go. So we'll start with the corn market here. And we'll go ahead and share that. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what happened yesterday. So if we look at the corn market, we can see here, let's make this nice and big. Right here's the report day, and yeah, we were a big winner. We rallied up from a low of about 649.5 all the way up to 673. Then there was Friday, and we saw good follow-through buying, which was a little bit surprising. We were coming into a 3-day weekend. It was Tuesday, and they're still buying, which I was beginning to feel pretty encouraged because we're out here and we're above a top. Then there was yesterday. And yesterday we didn't go down a whole lot, but what happened? We opened, we traded higher, and we got soundly rejected. And I'm not saying this is a top, but when you see behavior like this, like here's another good example of it, Look what happened. We came down. Now today we're not seeing a lot of buying. Yesterday morning we had some very interesting numbers come out pertaining to inflation. And if we look at soybeans, it's even more prominent. This is an outside day with a lower close. Here's the report. We did better. We did better. Boom, we got up just about to 15.50 and the buyers took the ball and went home. The market came down, and then you can see here today that we're moving lower. So yesterday we got some inflation numbers. The PPI number came out at minus 0.5 month over month. If you had 12 months running like that, you would have wholesale deflation of 6%. And, the markets have been looking for lower inflation numbers, and that had been making things feel a lot more better about the economy and things. But the worry took over, and what happened, we're going to go back here to our little friend, the S&P 500. The second this market gave up the ghost, shortly after the open, we were trading higher. We were above 4,000 and above this key yellow line, which is the 200-day moving average. Well, about 9:30 yesterday morning, everyone decided those numbers were a little too hot to handle, and the stock market reversed after making a recent high, just like the soybeans did, and just like we've seen this problem, and we fell into a big risk-off trade. And when this turned, everything else turned on a dime, meaning the dollar started moving up, crude oil moved down, and then when we look at the dollar, you can see we had a wild day yesterday, which for a currency we broke down, on the inflation numbers. Interest rates came down hard, but we came back up, and now we're not seeing any follow through selling, which could be a sign. Some things that drive the dollar up, one thing is risk off situations, the dollar index will pop. And as you can see, we've been going down, 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 down steadily. And now all of a sudden that pressure on the dollar seems to be alleviating a little bit. And this in turn is creating a few headaches for things like the corn market here, where we can see again today, we're not falling apart yet, but if we get some bearish news, maybe something out of South America, a bearish forecast, meaning wetter weather in parts of Argentina or parts of Brazil, we have a situation where the market is feeling heavy, and a little bit of a spark can generate some selling. And if we look at the stochastics here, we're getting to the point of overbought. We haven't given a hard sell signal yet, but we're getting close to that. And some of these other macro markets, and why we pay attention to the macro markets when we hit news valleys like we are in the corn right now, where we don't have a lot of news, there's a lot of big global macro things that come into play. And if we look at the chart of the S&P here, we've just about slammed through all three big moving averages, and that is what a sell signal looks like coming from the stochastic indicator, meaning we've overbought. And you can see back here, down we go. When we get down here, we bounce. So we are in an area where we could suffer some risk off, and that can create some decided pressure in some of these commodities, especially if there's no other news in place to drive them, which is kind of where we are right now.
I think I was going to kind of follow up on that. We are kind of in a time period right now. Our next big report, in my eyes, is going to be the prospective acreage report at the end of March. Mike, time and time again, our volatility period out of South America is quickly coming to an end. We're seeing those sands in the hourglass start to run out. Harvest has started in northern parts of Brazil. Mike gave a great report on that last night. Whenever we find ourselves in these times, in my opinion, the things that and the tools that Sterling just mentioned are pretty important. So let's think about this corn in a practical sense very quickly. We're not going to have a lot of our farmers and a lot of our customers go out and sell a bunch of new crop corn based on what we just talked about. It's just maybe they do a little bit, but it's not practical. If you work with farmers long enough, it's not. If you've got old crop corn, though, and there's a lot of old crop corn still unsold in the bins, this is something that would plant or on the river for the export market. Not so much with the export market, but they've been steady, but they've declined a little bit as ethanol plants get ownership through March. A lot of people have seen that. This may be a really good time to take a look at late February, early March basis, combine that with these futures levels over the next week or two to get something pretty reasonable. Sterling March corn futures right now hovering around 680, 680 and a half. Is that where you're seeing them right now? I don't have live quotes up.
Let me punch that right up here. And looking at the March corn right now at this very moment, we're at 680 and a quarter, and we're holding up okay for now. And that's
plus a basis minus a basis wherever you're at in the country. Maybe not a bad time to pull the trigger. It's certainly the best time that we've seen in the futures market for a good while. We're steady today. I like making some of those sales.
I would completely agree. A little bit of nervousness here, and we could be back to 650 a bushel really, really quickly, meaning a couple of days maybe, if a couple of other markets start getting out of hand at all, and the risk managers at these funds combined start tapping their rulers on the desk saying, hey, you got money made here, we got a margin call to pay, start selling. One other interesting thing, and I mentioned this in the Wednesday DMO, new crop corn is doing okay right now. However, new crop soybeans, as you can see, we had a very nice, very steady world. And then there was yesterday. Oops, we got knocked out of the box a little bit, and we're seeing some selling here. Now, the market is deeply oversold right now, but it can stay that way for extended periods. But we are beginning to see the signs of a breakdown in new crop soybeans. Now, there are things that can change this, China being the biggest thing. We have planting, we have all of that to go. But where we are right now, it looks like we may be trying to set a new range that may be a little bit lower than this old range that we had here where all the moving averages are running.
You know, Sterling, I'll mention this too. If you're looking at new crop beans, and I'm gonna dumb this down, and I know we've got a lot of folks that are experts on here, but we've also got some that don't do a lot of marketing. So one thing that folks have been successful with that I've talked to over the last week is we had a lot of offers left. So a lot of times you call the commercial elevator, you leave an offer. If the market hits a particular level, it executes in a contract. The way to market new crop soybeans right now is probably through the offer system. The market can react it can have a lot of volatility in a short period of time and then back down. So I had some people that were successful, Sterling, over the last week of putting $14 November futures offers in. Now, if you were watching that manually, you had to be pretty doggone good. You had to stay in front of the computer all the time to get it. But there were some fills there, not a lot, but a few fills at $14. And if you want to get started on new crop beans here, Sterling, I'm telling you to leave an offer. What's your thought on percentages and levels that you want to look at?
Well, right now, if you sold it at 14, good on you. You done good. You've got already a solid 33-cent lead. So that's good. I think, if you can get things done at 380, you're not going to get those done, or 1380. That may be as good as you're going to get unless something really changes to move the old crop beans higher right now. This market could easily, though, leak down to 1350 without too much problem. We'll probably then get a little bit of a bounce, maybe back to 1370 to 1380. And after that, we may start getting saggy again, especially when the South American harvests start coming in and starts pressuring the physical market, which that's going to be happening. Oh, it's probably already started a little bit, but that's going to be happening in a big way very soon. The Brazilian crop still looking 152 million tons. So that's noticeably bigger than last year. The only thing that may help provide some bounces here, we know Brazil always has logistical problems. They're already starting to crop up, so they're going to have a lot of beans to move. That may be the only thing that provides some transitory bounces.
You know, all the time we're looking for something new in the marketplace. What's going to happen in the future? This is something that we've talked about on this very meeting and in a lot of the WASI meetings, and really it surrounds Mike's information on weather and growing season in South America. But Sterling, I can't help to think, with the world's largest soybean crop being decided on in December and the first couple weeks of January, that we don't start to see the volatility that time of the year like we're accustomed to seeing in June and July historically. June and July is still going to carry a lot of volatility because there's a lot of protein being produced in the United States, largest corn supplier in the world. But we saw something in December and January that I think we weren't used to this year. And the thing that seemed peculiar about it to me is that soybeans held this volatility, wheat and corn not so much. So we kind of separated commodities, which is a little bit rare. Do you think that volatility is here to stay, Sterling? Are we going to talk in 10 years from now that a great time to sell soybeans due to volatility is December and the first part of January?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what we see, we see volatility when a crop goes in, then it depends on the weather, and then we see volatility when it goes out. So we're going to see, a whole new volatility cycle developing here. You can see it really here in the corn where we picked up right here, and then we slumped back, and here we get our second little knot here. So I definitely think that is something that you need to keep in mind, and it's something that you can take advantage of. And that's something, if you have ability to hold on to soybeans a little bit after harvest, very often that can prove to be advantageous.
Mike, you've been quiet so far, and I want you to talk about this. And I know you've done this in the past, but how many days, weeks do we have left on weather deciding what we're going to get out of South America? Where are we at there? I mean, can we get another 10 days of volatility on soybeans, or we have most of the knowns in place?
Yeah, I think we'll break it into two categories, Brooks. First of all, the Brazil crop. We've still got some problems in the south. That's still yet to be determined. But for the most part, the Brazil soybean crop is either close to maturity or in the reproductive stages. Pretty good weather continues for Brazil. Probably the bigger problem for Brazil right now, believe it or not, is to get the rains to stop. So Brazil's pretty good shape. I think most of that crop is known. Big problems in Argentina. I know the maps yesterday were a lot wetter for Argentina. They dried out a little bit this morning. So again, the Argentina crop isn't known, but one thing is we put the whole picture together. Brazil has such a big crop that even we have some pretty major drops in Argentina, we've still got a lot more soybeans coming out of South America this year. So for the most part, Brazil crop is known. Still some issues in Argentina, but looking at the thing as an aggregate, going to be a lot of soybeans coming out of South America this year.
Mike, I know you've got the numbers right on your tongue because I was in a meeting with you last night, but when you say a lot bigger, quantify that for us in bushels and tell us why it's a lot bigger. It's not necessarily because the yields are that much better. Give us some numbers out of there.
Yeah, basically looking at Sterling's talk about a 152 million metric ton crop, that's roughly 900 million more bushels coming out of Brazil. Current estimates are Argentina crop's going to be down about 300, so that's a net of 600 million bushels. That's more soybeans than what we grew here in Illinois this year. So again, big crop in Brazil, not so much yield per acre. They're getting better at growing crops just like we are in the U.S., but they did add an area the size of Kansas to the Brazil production this year. So they're beating us not only on better farming practices, better infrastructure, but they've also got a lot more acres to throw into the mix when prices are right.
So in your mind, are we down to, 10 days of determinate weather down there?
Yeah, I think one thing that maybe could surprise us some, Brooks, if we do get a lot of rains in Brazil affecting crop quality, I think the market's already got a 25% decrease in Argentine production on the maps already. So the Brazilian and the South American soybean market's getting close to a close, although there could be some surprises with too much rain or the Argentine crop really falling off the board. A long time to go on corn. The safrinha corn crop in Brazil, 75%, and that's just going in the ground today. So again, lots of volatility for corn, but the soybean story is pretty much told.
So Sterling, what's the seesaw? What's the balance on this? I mean, we see that we're going to be bringing more bushels out of South America. Those naturally are probably holding us back on our Chinese exports here in the U.S. Maybe a wait and see mentality from China as far as what they need to buy. I know we're lagging behind just a little bit. What's going on there?
Well, I have some bad news that in some ways is good news. And I'm going to put up a chart right here. This should be a chart of crude oil there. Everyone seeing that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is good news and it's bad news. As we can see, the price of crude oil has been doing better. Even crude oil that had been, quite bullish suffered yesterday in our little risk off bit. Notice how this is different from soybeans. Crude oil is picking up and it looks like we formed a bottom and we're probably trying to set a new range, maybe 78's at the bottom. We'll call 85, 80, 88 the top. This is a sign of China reopening. China is very cagey about things that they do and how they do them. But if we were going to see a Chinese reopening, a couple of things where we would look to see that. First one is crude oil. The next one, this is a chart of copper. And notice how much better copper's doing. And yes, yesterday, same story here, but notice we're holding on. If China reopens, that will be something where they are probably going to start taking in more soybeans. And yes, a lot of them are going to come from Brazil, but there's a pretty good chance that soybean exports will be okay. And we've seen a reasonable improvement in things going to China, and they're back on track. Where we're not seeing that is in the corn market. They have not been all that aggressive buying corn, and if you look at export sales numbers for corn, they haven't been that good. So we could see a situation where China is going to need the soybeans, but they may not be as inclined to buy the corn. Also, yesterday, hog prices in China have come down noticeably. We're now sitting right around $1 a pound, give or take. That's down 15, 20 cents. The Chinese government suggested that hog producers cut their sow supplies. Now, when you start cutting down on sows, that's because the hogs have gotten a little too cheap. That also means less corn being needed in that feed ration. So that may be we may be good for soybeans, may not be so great for corn going forward, especially if right now these conditions dries up a little bit in Brazil and they have an easy time planting this stuff into the good conditions. That's going to make for a pretty good corn crop.
Sterling and Mike and Christy, you guys know I've got kind of a hard stop today at 9:30. I'm going to have to hop on here, but I know everybody's in good hands here. One thing that I get a lot of questions for, and I'm going to switch gears completely, but this is something I got 2 texts on from people who are viewing this morning. Sterling, if you can work into the presentation on the new soybean processing plants that are proposed in the United
North Dakota as being soybean land, and I'm going to bring up the dreaded climate change phrase here, but it's getting easier to grow soybeans in North Dakota. And that's not the way it had been for the 100 years preceding this. But with that happening, one, we're doing a better job of exporting soybean meal. That's for real. There are places that need soybean meal to feed, particularly into Europe. We've seen continued problems with Argentina, who is a major soybean meal exporter. So that is going to create more localized demand for soybeans. Also, there's greater demand for soybean oil into biodiesel, biofuels, and all the other things that you can make out of soybean oil, because you can make all sorts of neat stuff out of that. So that is going to help offset, and that's going to keep protein demand and demand for soybeans really quite stout in a much longer, bigger picture. This is going to be offset by more electric cars and fewer miles driven. We may not be seeing so much for the ethanol world. That is something that it's not a problem today. It's not going to be a problem next year. By 2028, it's going to be, we may be looking at lower ethanol consumption. And if that's the case, we may see, more acres reaching into the soybeans. And some of this, we're shrinking our wheat footprint, but the U.S.'s footprint in the global wheat world, I have an old joke, and if one of my buddies from Citibank's on here listening, it's a corn and soybean world to a great extent. We let wheat live in it. And that situation is probably going to be more exacerbated. Higher quality wheats, things like Durham wheat, are going to be in much better demand than just ordinary wheat. And that's something that we're probably going to have to get used to, because wheat is grown everywhere. And there's a new player in the global world of wheat, India. India for a long time suffered, struggled. India is now exporting wheat into the biggest importer, which is Egypt. So that is changing things in a much bigger sense. And if India can become a little bit more like Brazil in their wheat production, that's going to change wheat, because they are obviously right in the place where it's a lot easier to send wheat from India to Egypt than it is from Minot, North Dakota. It's a lot cheaper. So that's going to be a bigger dynamic that we're going to need to look at. And that's something where we will probably see more beans coming out of the Dakotas going forward. So Mike,
do you think we're producing enough soybeans though to fill those soybean plant expansions, or do you think we'll have to import beans to?
Well, importing the soybeans, typically it's a coastal thing. If you need to move them into the Carolinas, maybe into the South, we won't be necessarily importing beans from other countries, but I could see North Dakota importing soybeans from Minnesota. They could certainly do that, because if you have a plant that's closer, all this stuff is heavy and you have to move it, and that just adds to cost. If it's easier to send them just a few miles into North Dakota as opposed to take them all the way down to Mankato, that's something that could affect localized basis a little bit. But I think generally the demand for protein and the newfound demand that we see for soybean oil is something that should offset that, and it shouldn't be too much of a headache. So in a bigger picture, I would be more favorable soybeans generally than corn. I think corn may see some struggles here over the near term. And that's something, well, we plant fewer acres, we lose some acres, or perhaps we can find some new things to do with corn.
Well, we can pop it because it's popcorn day.
It is in fact popcorn day, and that would make more room for popcorn. And
make more movies. Make more movies.
Make more movies. Get more people to go to more movies. More minor league baseball parks. That's where you can get some marginal growth in the corn, and maybe there's been all these predictions about soccer becoming a big thing. Now, we've had soccer moms for, 40 years. Soccer has not yet become a big, where we're filling, Arrowhead Stadium with it. But if we were to get to that point, there would be a great place to sell all kinds of popcorn, because you got to do something while you're watching them run up and down the field.
All true. All true.
Exactly. Well, I tell you what, why don't we pass the ball off here to Mike? Unless, do you have anything to follow up there, Sterling? I could pass it on off here to Mike. And Mike, maybe you could go ahead and tell us, how's that popcorn crop? I mean, it's popcorn day. I, I'm trying to find a way to save our corn crop. I'm trying to be positive here.
See my slides okay, Christy?
Yeah,
Sterling?
you can.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll probably run 10, 15 minutes here. We'll let Sterling close. I've got a few questions for Sterling also. What I'm going to talk about this morning, I'm just going to give you the final score on the U.S. and soybean yields per acre. Learned some things in 2022. I'm going to give you a little more detail on the South American crop and wrap up on U.S. weather. Believe it or not, the U.S. weather picture has gotten a lot better heading into spring, which looks good. Not the best for crop prices. This is the day that Sterling Brooks and I were into southeast Nebraska. It was early August. And looking back to 2022, the dryland corn and soybean yields in the driest areas of Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota were just as bad as expected. Sterling talked about the reduction in acres. A lot more corn got chopped, a lot of corn got abandoned, and the drought was a real thing in that part of the world. And one thing that's kind of funny is you start thinking about future years. When we were out in southeast Nebraska, that part of the state wasn't even showing up on the drought map, and that crop was already done the day Brooks and I and the sales rep and the agents were farming and standing in that ditch. One thing to talk about here, I think a lot of farmers feel bulletproof on their genetics. These new hybrids do a great job of going down and getting water, but hybrids do have their breaking point. Over here on the left, I've got a field from northwest Iowa on some sandier soils that reach its breaking point. Did dodge a pretty big bullet. I've got a picture on the right. That's a ear of a white corn from Kentucky, early planted corn. We were pretty close to having some big crop losses in Kentucky, Tennessee, Southern Illinois. We got those just-in-time rains. I'm going to give a little plug here for the virtual crop tour. That's our farm in McLean County. And one thing our farm kind of proved, state crops, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, on the better soil types proved to be extremely resilient despite 22 dry conditions. And resiliency is something I respect in a corn plant and also in a human being. That crop never did give up. Over here on the left is what our corn looked like on June 21st. It's been rolling up like pineapple for 2 weeks. All it took was a 2-inch rain on June 22nd, and we're going to talk about how quickly that corn grew. It went from waist high to I couldn't touch the tassel in 10 days. So that's a growth rate of at least 6 inches per day. So again, all that corn was needing was moisture. And thank goodness we got that rain on June 25th, or this corn and soybean market would be in a lot different spot. So we did get some nice rains here in the central and eastern belts. That field ended up making 260 bushels per acre, and we were on the drought map all summer. We went between abnormally dry and moderate drought. And believe it or not, I took that slide, I think one of the last virtual crop tours in August, and we were under moderate drought at that time, and I've got 34,000 baseball bats at eye level. So again, lesson learned from 22, the drought monitor does a poor job of predicting yields, especially when you've got some pretty good dirt underneath your corn and soybean crops. We've already talked about the big thing from the balance sheets, and Sterling did a great job talking about that. It wasn't so much the yield going up 1 bushel per acre, it was more that we took 1.6 million acres off the balance sheet. But again, if everybody thinks that crop wasn't a real thing in the Western Belt, that is not the case. The state of Texas only averaged 95 bushels an acre, Kansas 115, Nebraska, which is 60%. The drought was real, and we made up for it with those timely rains in the Illinois, Iowa, Indiana. Iowa somehow grew a 200 bushel yield with very little water. We set a record yield here in Illinois at 214. A lot of factors from that come to one of our meetings, and I'll tell you about why Illinois set a record this year, and also a record crop in Minnesota. The big story on soybeans is something that we were kind of ahead of the market a little bit. I know Sterling Brooks and I, we did that meeting out in Nebraska when the crops were burning up, and we were talking to soybean yield potentially as low as 48, 49 bushels per acre. And although we did go slightly higher than 50, we did settle back down to a 49.5 in the final. And one thing too, looking at that map, very few record soybean yields per acre. We just see the record yield here in Arkansas and down here in, it looks like Mississippi there. Going to talk a little more detail about South America. Here's kind of what my things I'm learning about Brazil corn crop. For the most part, that crop Looking at the weather maps here in December and January, they have not had a lot of excessive heat in Brazil. And as of last week, the last report I saw, just 0.6% of the soybeans were harvested. They're a little bit behind average. And believe it or not, wet fields is the issue for most. There's more soybeans ready to be harvested. They just need those fields to dry out. And again, Brazil farmers are hoping for drier weather for crops nearing maturity. And as we talked about earlier with Brooks and Sterling, the majority of the Brazilian soybean crop is now in the reproductive stages. Believe it or not, looking at the Brazil weather maps, most of those farmers are actually hoping the rains get a little bit lighter versus heavier, except for that southern 10 to 15%. That's about the major unknown in Brazil on the soybean crop, is how is that southern 10 to 15% going to yield. A little different story here in Argentina. Most of Argentina is still under historic drought, and this goes back decades. Planting was delayed in the dry areas, which pushes our crop maturity later. Some of the crop condition reports coming out of some of the areas of Argentina are horrible, kind of western Kansas non-irrigated style 22. And the majority of the Argentine soybean crop does have more time for rain based on later planting dates, and also this year, especially because of the drier soils. Most of that crop is still the late vegetative, early reproductive stages, more like our June through mid-July. So the Argentine crop does have some time to catch some more rains. I always show this map when I'm talking about South America. The more red dots you see and the heavier those red dots are, shows us where the major production is. So again, a big chunk of soybeans up here in central Brazil, those are nearing maturity, but we still got some time here in southern Brazil. Again, a lot of acres down here, and most of that Argentine crop is kind of working this side in the eastern part of Argentina. So the redder the map, the more important it is to watch those weather maps. And here's what the 30-day percent of normal map looks like. Kind of been a broken record all year. We've been talking about this for it seems like months now. Very good conditions through much of Brazil. Not too much rain, not too dry, just a few little scattered dry pockets up here. And again, most of those problems are kind of down here in that southern part of Brazil. And that very important Argentine production area is kind of right through here in the east. And most of that area is running very, very dry here. And again, we don't talk a lot about Paraguay or Uruguay, but Uruguay is the heart of the drought right now. So again, that's South American map. It's kind of been telling us 30-day percent of normal has been telling us here for the last couple of months. Very good conditions through most of Brazil and tougher conditions through southern Brazil and Argentina. Looking at the forecast, this map did flip a little bit. Kind of looking up here, it's our 1 week map. Lots of yellows and reds, which is plenty of rain, almost too much in some areas. 2 week, a lot of good rains here in Brazil continues. And yesterday, the map showed a lot more rain here down here for southern Brazil and Argentina. That did dry up a little bit here today. So as you kind of start looking at the maps moving forward, watch this area. This area needs rain down here. And this area up here could actually looks like. And as far as the heat or temperature maps, these have also been pretty similar for the last 6 weeks. These blues and the 1 week map show below normal temperatures for Brazil. That continues, and this darker brown is some of the heat. So basically where it's been raining, it's been cooler. Where it's not been raining, it's been hotter. So again, that's kind of our maps, and those really haven't changed a whole lot. This is kind of where the rubber hits the road here. I think Sterling talked about a 152 million metric ton crop coming out of Brazil. That's where most of the market analysts are coming in, 150 to 153, although Sterling hits them as close as anybody. My bias for the Brazil crop is neutral to slightly down, but I'm not talking down to the 145 range. I'm talking maybe 148, 149, kind of like looking at that southern Brazil situation. It's too early yet to really get the projections coming out of Argentina, but right now, most of the projections I'm hearing I'm going to show this slide, and I'll slow down, let maybe Sterling comment here a little bit. This is kind of his wheelhouse here. I'm going to talk about extra South American soybeans compared to last year. Last year, Brazil had a pretty mediocre crop. This year's crop is projected to be 25 million metric tons better, or 916 million bushels more beans than last year. And what does 918 million bushels of beans equal? Last year, Illinois produced 677, so we can throw on Nebraska and Illinois, and that's how many extra beans Brazil grew this year. But on the bad side for the Argentine farmers, but for the good side for Illinois and farmers and the U.S. farmers, Argentine production is expected to be down about 367. So let's look at the net. Based on current projection, there's a net of 15 million metric tons, or 550 million more bushels coming out of South America this year. Basically, more beans are coming out of South America, equal to what Iowa produced last year. And big picture, so I need Sterling's help. Looks like to be a lot more soybeans on the world market, but a lot less soybean meal. So my question for Sterling is, how does that kind of impact us here, looking at exports, meal versus whole soybeans?
Well, what we'll see is we will obviously see more beans getting exported, and a lot of those, China does not really import soybean meal. They import the raw soybeans, and so we'll see more going there. What we will see are probably elevated crush margins. We will be crushing more beans here, assuming we have them to crush, because we have to start thinking about what the United States crop is going to look like. Where are we going to be? And this is a good question. Where are we going to be with fertility? A lot of what happened last year, and why, some of these satellite yield projections and things showed we were going to get a pretty good crop. We were still sitting talking 177, 178 in corn in July, and then we had that crop tour, and that pulled the rug out from underneath yields, because satellite imagery works really well, but we had a crop that wasn't as fertilized as what we were used to. So you get out in the field and suddenly you start to see problems. So where are we going to be with fertility this year? How many corners are going to get cut? And that's going to determine where we are with the U.S. situation. But I do think that means elevated crush margins, and probably elevated meal prices, which will have knock-on effects going back into the livestock market. And I won't go too far in the weeds with that, but we are probably looking at a smaller cattle herd. And I know I've been saying that for a year and a half, and prices have edged higher, but this may be the year where we finally really push prices. Notice that feeder prices have held up pretty well.
Yeah, appreciate that, sir. I've got a few more questions here as we talk about U.S. weather, and also crew Chrissy, anytime you want to chime in, go ahead. Morning's drought monitor, and this map still looks tough, especially looking from Texas through Oklahoma, down here through Kansas. Nebraska map, even though it looks tough, has really improved here over the winter months. But again, tough looking drought map. But U.S. conditions have greatly improved since November, and especially when you start thinking about the Eastern Belt, some really nice improvements in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. That's kind of the good news. Basically, we set a record on November 1st in the continuous U.S. We were at 85.26% of the continuous U.S. in drought, abnormally dry or drier, and we've taken 20 points off of that just here and a half. Very rare to see that much of a drought improvement in December and January, but that's what's going on here. And to me, that looks good for crop prospects, especially corn, soybeans here in the U.S.
Yeah, and we picked up a fair amount of moisture across most of Nebraska, and that was not reflected on that drought monitor. They cut that off on Tuesday, and we did pick up some meaningful precipitation for the first time in a long time here over the last couple of days, and I don't know if we're actually shifting the weather pattern. The forecasts look like they're going back to dry, but at least for the time being, we have seen some improvement.
Yeah, thanks, Sterling.
And Mike,
Christy,
I'm not sure if it's a question. It says Baltic dry index is down. Is that good support for ag economy?
What was the question again? I'm sorry, Christy.
Well, it says Baltic dry index is down. Is that good support for the ag economy?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I can even answer that one. I'm gonna have to turn it over to somebody smart there. I don't even know what that means. Can Sterling help us on that?
What that means is freight rates are dropping. What drives freight rates lower are two things. One, lower energy prices. We have that. Number two, the amount of actual goods that get exported. What this means is China's exports are still slumping, and they are not moving items at the same level that they have been moving it because of their COVID lockdowns. What does this mean eventually for agricultural economies? Well, one, when you have lower freight rates, it's easier to ship and move the stuff. That helps offset some of these elevated prices. So in a way, it's bad. In a way, it's good. A lot of it's going to depend on China coming back and coming in and buying the items. Generally speaking, the world is getting hungrier. This means more items will get moved, and that will lead to tighter supplies for corn and soybeans eventually. But if we see, if we make it up in production, if we have, if we crank out a 178, 179 yield next year for corn, we're going to have a lot more corn sitting around. If we see a 51.5, 52 soybean yield, that will change things. What this will mean is more wheat will be moving, and right now wheat is moving a lot coming out of both India and Russia. So that's keeping the market well satisfied, and that is not necessarily good for promoting prices. Is it good for countries that have too expensive of food and they have to import a lot of things? Yes, this would be good for Japan in some ways. But it also, the reason it's happening is because it's not a good thing, meaning we're not exporting and moving goods at the same level that we would normally expect. And that comes back to the idea of a global recession. Are we going to have a recession? That is the big worry right now. I'm going to stick with my concept of the recession, meaning we're trying to go through a period of adjustment coming after an economic shock. Are we going to see a broad-based economic slowdown and a technical recession? Maybe. My guess is it's going to be shallow simply because employment remains so strong. I mean, we hear about all the tech layoffs and everything like that. Tech jobs make up 2% of all employees. So the fact that Microsoft is laying off 10,000 people may be a cue that they're just adjusting to get within costs, and companies are having to readjust. So if we see the economy pick up in the second half of the year, which I do think is going to be the scenario, I think the stock market, we're going to see useless rips and shallow dips and a big picture of not going anywhere. So if you're putting money in your 401k, try to buy on red days. That's going to be about the best you're going to be able to do for the first 6 months. If we begin to see interest rates back off, yield curves normalize, the economy picks up, that will be good for the agricultural economies. It will also send freight rates up.
Thanks, Sterling. While Sterling was talking a little bit about wheat here, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the wheat in the Southern Plains here. We've got a very dry and building drought here. This is my 30-day percent of normal maps. The reds are very low precipitation over the last month. And as you can see, we've got a lot of issues down here with the Oklahoma, Kansas wheat crop. But one thing that Sterling has taught me since I've been working with him, wheat is a world market like we just talked about. And all these problems in the Southern Plains really aren't correlating to a massive price increase in wheat. As far as moisture over the last 30 days, we've had some very beneficial rains, although too much in parts of California, working our way through Nevada. Really good moisture like Sterling talked about for most of Nebraska. So again, looking at that map, we've still got the major area of crop concern in the U.S. is that winter wheat crop here in the Southern Plains. And as Sterling talked about, Nebraska was a big winter with snowfall from our latest storm, Iggy. And Sterling also talked about this. The maps do bluer and bluer in January into early February. And what blue maps mean to me when there's no snow cover on the ground here from Iowa, Illinois, Indiana east, we're going to get some real nice freeze thaw. That's Mother Nature's chisel plow doing a good job of breaking up our soil structure, leads to better water infiltration. So again, as much cold as we can get, hopefully with not a lot of snow cover. I know we got a lot of snow in the Dakotas and also Nebraska, but that's a pretty good mechanism for increasing our crop yields for 2023. The only bad part, we're doing a lot of traveling now and a lot more potholes to encounter. I want to wish you all a healthy and productive 2023. For you folks who've got white there out your windows, we've got just fog here, but I want to show you just some really pretty trees from Decatur, Illinois, a fall race. Beautiful fall smallmouth here in McLean County, and that's my wife standing at the University of Illinois homecoming race after that, and that beautiful orange waterfall. So I'll give you a little color here for today.
And I'm still laughing because we have to name every single storm that comes through anymore.
Iggy, I like Iggy.
Iggy.
Sterling had to go out and scoop for 20 minutes after Iggy. It was almost a disaster.
Yeah. Snowmageddon 2023, we will rebuild. Christy, if you want to throw me the ball real quick, we're going to talk about what's going on right at the moment here for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So these things, they change, they move, and they adjust. And as we can see here, we are seeing the corn market is doing a little bit better, but we have come off the best levels of the day. If we look at soybeans, we're down, but we've bounced a little bit off the lowest levels and we're beginning to churn. But just in the time we've been talking, the dollar index went from being negative to now it's turning positive. Gold, which is a good barometer for the commodity space in general. This is a minute by minute chart. This was the high of the move. This was our failed high. We took off, tried to challenge it again today, and as you can see, we're starting to back away. And looking at the stock market, we have again moved lower. And one of the internal things I look at, this subtracts all the stocks going up subtracts all the stocks going down from all the stocks going up, and we're at about negative 850. When this number runs below 700, that indicates market liquidation going on. So it looks like we are creeping back into a risk-off situation. One thing I'd like to plug for everyone is our podcasts. 3 times a day, in the morning, right around 10 o'clock. We take an early morning overview and talk about what's going on in every market and all the news that's driving things. Also, I cover livestock about 10:30 every morning. Then in the afternoon, there is a wrap-up of what goes on. This is meant as a companion for the DMO. Some days, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually we're talking about exports, so there's not necessarily as much market information. This is 5 minutes. It's very easy to listen to. I don't make anything too complicated, but it's free and they're very easy to get. So I'd suggest everyone have your farmers listen to it. You can listen to it. You can let your cousin, the dentist, listen to it too. He may benefit from it.
Absolutely. You guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you hanging out with us all today. Thank you, Brooks and Sterling and Mike, for just sharing everything with us today, sharing all your expertise. It's always a great way just to start January with the WASD, that great big report, and then today, all this information. It gets us off on the right foot to get our risk management plans going the way they should be. We want to remind you to be joining us for our live coverage of the February WASD, which will be held on Wednesday, February 8th. That webinar will begin at 10:45 a.m. Central Time. So watch for that link on our social platforms, and it will be in an upcoming daily market email. So if you aren't getting that, of course you should be, but if you're not, shoot us an email to marketinginfo@sompointernational.com, and please consider following us on our social platforms, especially Twitter, because every morning, early, like really early, Sterling will provide an early morning tweet to start off the day, and that kind of kickstarts the day, gets everybody going, knowing what's going on with the day. And as Sterling said, we have those podcasts. You should be following those. You can subscribe to those, and that will just come to you every day. You can follow those on whatever your favorite channel is, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whichever one it is, Podbean, and you can just subscribe. We have the Ag Market Brief, which comes every day. It comes in the morning and in the afternoon. And then we also have the Livestock Market Brief, and that's in the afternoon. You can, if you don't have that right now, if you're not finding that on your channel that you normally follow, you can get access to that through those daily emails. So how easy is that? Once you find those links, go right to it, and then you can just hit the subscribe. If you have any issues with that, send us an email. Again, super easy, marketinginfo@sompointernational.com. So you can hit that subscribe, get all that information. Of course, you can always contact us at marketinginfo@sompointernational.com, and we'll answer whatever questions we can and help you through that whole process. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next month.